This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Ever wonder how your voice travels through the airwaves to reach someone miles away? It's all about modulation, my friends. Today's discussion dives into the fascinating world of radio signal modulation.
Exactly. It's the magic behind all wireless communication. We take it for granted, but it's a pretty complex process, you know?
So we're talking AM, FM, SSB, the whole shebang.
Absolutely. We'll unpack the basics, explore why we even need modulation, and then dive into some of the different methods.
Sounds like a plan. Let's start with the why. Why do we need to modulate a radio signal in the first place? So why not just send the audio signal directly? Seems simpler, right?
It seems simple, but it's a recipe for disaster. Imagine everyone transmitting on the same low frequencies. Total chaos.
Total interference. Like a giant noisy party nobody can understand, right?
Exactly. Plus, the antennas would be ridiculously huge. We're talking kilometers long for audio frequencies.
Yikes. That's not practical at all. So modulation solves these problems. So how does modulation actually work? What are we changing in the radio wave?
We're manipulating the carrier wave, its amplitude, frequency, or phase to carry the information.
Amplitude modulation, AM, is the classic example, right? Changing the amplitude of the carrier wave.
That's right. Then there's frequency modulation, FM, which changes the frequency, and phase modulation, PM, which changes the phase.
And each has its own pros and cons, I'm sure. Let's talk AM. It's inefficient, isn't it?
Very inefficient. It wastes a lot of power on the carrier wave itself, which doesn't carry any information.
And it transmits redundant information in both sidebands.
Precisely. That's why single sideband, SSB, is so much better. It gets rid of the carrier and one of the sidebands.
So 4 times more efficient. Why isn't everything SSB then? SSB is more complex, right? Requires more sophisticated circuitry.
It does. There are a few different ways to generate an SSB signal. The filter method, Hartley modulation, and Weaver modulation.
Each with its own trade-offs. The filter method uses a crystal filter to remove the unwanted sideband.
The Hartley method uses phase shifting, and the Weaver method is a clever combination of both.
All aiming for that perfect, efficient signal. Let's shift gears to FM. It's popular for VHF, UHF, right?
Yes, especially for repeaters. It's more resistant to noise than AM.
But it uses more bandwidth.
True. The bandwidth depends on the frequency deviation and the baseband signal. Carson's rule gives us an approximation.
And there's wideband FM, WFFM, and narrowband FM, NFM. NFM is becoming the standard. What about digital modulation? PSK, FSK, ASK. How do those fit in?
They're the digital equivalents of AM, FM, and PM. Instead of continuous variations, we have discrete shifts in amplitude, frequency, or phase.
So it's the same basic principle, just applied to digital signals.
Exactly. And digital signal processing is making it all much more efficient and flexible.
Software-defined radios, CDRs, are a great example of that. So where do we see all these modulation techniques in action?
Everywhere, from AM radio broadcasts to HF amateur radio using SSB, to VHF/UHF repeaters using FM, and even satellite communications.
It's the backbone of modern communication.
Absolutely. And the ongoing development of digital modulation techniques is constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
It's amazing to think about all the technology packed into something we use every day. We touched on efficiency earlier. Can you elaborate on the modulation index and how it relates to efficiency?
The modulation index essentially tells us how much the carrier wave is being changed by the information signal. In AM, a higher modulation index means more efficient use of power, but it's still not as efficient as SSB.
So maximizing the modulation index without overmodulation is key for AM.
Exactly. Overmodulation leads to distortion. SSB avoids this problem entirely by removing the redundant components.
Let's go back to SSB for a moment. You mentioned balanced modulators. What's their role?
Balanced modulators are crucial for generating SSB. They suppress the carrier and the baseband signal, leaving only the sidebands.
So they're like the key ingredient in creating a clean SSB signal.
Precisely. Different types of balanced modulators, like ring modulators or Gilbert cells, can be used.
So how does one choose the right modulation technique for a particular application?
It depends on several factors: bandwidth availability, power efficiency requirements, noise immunity, and the type of information being transmitted. Each modulation method has its strengths and weaknesses. It's a tough call sometimes.
This has been a fantastic overview of radio signal modulation. It's a complex topic, but you've made it incredibly clear and engaging. Thanks for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. It was fun.